My brother cleared out my savings account to pay his gambling debts, and my parents convinced me to forgive him. Then he did something worse, so I exposed him at Thanksgiving dinner. Halfway through Thanksgiving dinner, my brother Ryan stood to announce that he had been gambling free for 1 year. My parents applauded. My mother cried. Ryan thanked them for believing people could change, then looked at me as though he expected me to join the performance. Instead, I placed 3 bank statements beside his plate. The first showed the $18,600 he had taken from my savings account the previous year. The second showed $42,000 missing from our grandmother's care fund. The third showed that Ryan had transferred part of Grandma's money 3 weeks after receiving his 1-year recovery chip. Ryan called the documents fake. Dad ordered me to clear the table before Grandma saw them. Then Grandma's financial advisor walked into the dining room. Ryan had spent years relying on our parents to convert theft into a family misunderstanding. What he didn't know was that I had stopped asking for their permission to tell the truth. My name is Julia. I'm 31, and Ryan is 34. We grew up in a family that treated his mistakes as emergencies and my reactions as the real problem. Ryan was charming, athletic, and reckless. Teachers liked him even when he failed classes. Coaches gave him second chances. Our parents, Michael and Susan, believed he was destined for something impressive if life would stop distracting him. I was the quiet child who completed assignments and saved birthday money. When I made a mistake, my parents said I should know better. When Ryan made one, they asked what pressure had caused it. His gambling began with sports bets in college. At first, everyone treated it like a hobby. Ryan showed us screenshots when he won and never mentioned the losses. Dad enjoyed discussing games with him and occasionally placed small bets through Ryan's account. By 26, Ryan was borrowing money near the end of every month. He blamed inconsistent commissions from his sales job. Mom paid his rent twice. Dad covered a car payment and warned him it was the final time. There were many final times. Ryan married a woman named Claire when he was 29. She left 18 months later. My parents said Claire was impatient and unwilling to support him through financial stress. Claire privately told me Ryan had gambled away their tax refund and opened a credit card in her name. I believed Claire, but I did not tell my parents. I knew they would accuse her of trying to ruin Ryan during the divorce. Ryan moved back into their basement. He said he had stopped gambling and attended a few meetings. Within months, he had a new job and seemed stable. I wanted to believe the worst was over. At that time, I was saving for a down payment on a condo. I had $18,600 in a high-yield savings account linked to my checking account. It had taken me almost 4 years to build. 6 months before the theft, I had outpatient surgery. Ryan drove me home and stayed in my apartment while I recovered. I asked him to pay 1 utility bill from my laptop because I was groggy, and the deadline was that day. I changed the password afterward, but I did not realize the browser had saved access on an old tablet he borrowed that week. One Monday morning, I opened my bank app and saw a balance of $12.41. At first, I assumed the app was broken. Then I saw 3 transfers to an account bearing Ryan's name. The transfers had occurred over 4 days. I called Ryan more than 20 times. He did not answer. I contacted the bank, froze my accounts, and filed a fraud report. The bank representative told me the transfers appeared to come from a recognized device using valid credentials. Mom called before Ryan did. She said Ryan had made a terrible mistake because people were threatening him over gambling debts. She asked me not to involve police until Dad could arrange repayment. I asked Mom how she knew. She admitted Ryan had called them the night before the final transfer. My parents knew he had accessed my account and had spent hours deciding how to protect him before anyone warned me. Dad came to my apartment with a cashier's check for $5,000. He said it was everything they could provide immediately. He promised they would sell a car and repay the rest. Dad told me, "If you report him, he loses his job and you may never recover the money." I said Ryan had stolen from me. Dad replied that addiction changed the moral calculation and Ryan needed treatment rather than jail. Mom sat on my couch crying and asked whether I wanted my brother dead. She said the people he owed were dangerous and taking my money had prevented something worse. I knew almost nothing about gambling addiction. I also knew my parents would never forgive me if Ryan harmed himself after I reported him. Under that pressure, I agreed to describe the transfers to the bank as a family dispute rather than pursue a criminal complaint. That decision cost me more than the money. The bank closed the fraud case. My condo offer fell through because I no longer had the down payment. Ryan entered a 30-day treatment program paid for by my parents. Before leaving, he sent me a message saying he was sorry his illness had affected me. He did not say he was sorry he had stolen my savings. My parents repaid another $6,000 over the next 8 months. Every payment came with a reminder that they were sacrificing retirement funds because I had refused to forgive Ryan properly. When I asked Ryan for a written repayment plan, Mom said financial pressure could trigger relapse. At family events, everyone avoided the subject. Ryan spoke openly about recovery but described his lowest point as nearly losing his family. He never mentioned what he had done to me. I stopped attending most gatherings. That allowed my parents to tell relatives I was angry because Ryan received more emotional support. The theft became a disagreement about compassion. Grandma Evelyn was the only person who sensed more had happened. She was 82 and beginning to have memory problems, but she knew I had postponed buying a home. When she asked why, Mom answered for me and said the market had changed. I did not correct her. Grandma had recently moved into assisted living, and I did not want her frightened by the family's finances. Grandma's care was funded by the sale of her house. After paying entrance fees, about $90,000 remained in a managed account. Dad and Aunt Linda were authorized to approve expenses together. Ryan had no role. 10 months after stealing from me, Ryan announced that he had been gambling free for a year. The timeline did not make sense, but Mom said recovery anniversaries were personal, and I should not police his language. Around the same time, Aunt Linda noticed that Grandma's care account balance was dropping faster than expected. Dad said the facility had raised its fees. Linda asked for statements, but Dad delayed sending them. One evening, Aunt Linda called me. She had obtained the statements directly from Grandma's financial advisor, Mr. Chen. There were 6 transfers totaling $42,000 to a small consulting company. The company belonged to Ryan. Dad had approved the first transfer. His electronic authorization appeared on the remaining 5, but he denied approving them. He admitted Ryan had asked for $12,000 to settle business debts. Dad believed lending him money from Grandma's account would be temporary because Ryan expected a commission. Dad approved one transfer without telling Linda. Ryan then reused access Dad had given him to create the others. The pattern was almost identical to what he had done to me. Dad wanted to confront Ryan privately and arrange repayment before Linda contacted the bank. Mom begged us to consider Grandma's health. She said an investigation could force Grandma to move if the facility learned her funds were missing. For about an hour, I felt myself slipping into the old role. I began calculating how much each relative could contribute and whether I could take a loan. Then, Aunt Linda asked why the family's solution to Ryan stealing money was always finding new money for everyone except Ryan to repay. That stopped me. Mr. Chen reviewed the account history. The first payment had been labeled as home repairs, even though Grandma no longer owned a home. The later transfers used altered invoices bearing the assisted living facility's name. The facility confirmed the invoices were not theirs. This was not one desperate transfer during a crisis. Ryan had created a system and repeated it for 5 months. The last transfer occurred 3 weeks after the date printed on his recovery chip. Aunt Linda reported the unauthorized transactions to the bank and Adult Protective Services. Because Dad had knowingly approved the first transfer, investigators needed to separate his bad decision from Ryan's later fraud. Dad was furious with Linda for involving outsiders. Mom blamed me. She said I had poisoned Linda against Ryan because I never released my resentment. I asked Mom whether she believed Ryan had taken Grandma's money. Mom said she believed he had intended to replace it. In her mind, intention transformed theft into borrowing. Ryan denied everything. He claimed Dad had approved all 6 payments as investments in his company. Dad knew that was false, but admitting it publicly meant acknowledging that Ryan had exploited him too. Thanksgiving was scheduled at my parents' house 2 weeks later. Mom wanted everyone to attend and forbade any discussion of the investigation. She said Grandma deserved one peaceful holiday. I initially planned not to go. Then Grandma called me and asked why people stopped speaking whenever she entered a room. She knew money was missing. She simply did not know who had taken it. Grandma told me, "People think forgetting some things means I have no right to know anything." I realized my parents were using her memory problems to justify keeping her uninformed about her own money. With Mr. Chen and Aunt Linda, I created a clear summary for Grandma. We explained the missing funds without overwhelming her. Grandma asked whether Ryan had done it. I said the records showed money going to his company and that an investigation was ongoing. Grandma decided she wanted to attend Thanksgiving. She also asked Mr. Chen to come near dessert so she could change her financial authorizations afterward. Mom did not know he was invited. I brought copies of the relevant statements. I did not plan to announce anything if Ryan remained quiet. I wanted Grandma to enjoy dinner before dealing with paperwork. Ryan made that impossible. After the meal, Dad praised Ryan for rebuilding his life. Ryan stood with a recovery chip in his hand and announced that he had been gambling-free for 1 year. He thanked Mom and Dad for believing in second chances. Then Ryan said, "Even people who judged me are here tonight, and I forgive them too." He looked directly at me. Mom began applauding. Several relatives joined her. I asked Ryan whether his recovery included repaying the money he stole. Mom told me not to ruin Thanksgiving. Ryan smiled and said he would pray for me to let go of bitterness. That was my final straw. I placed 3 statements beside his plate: my emptied savings account, Grandma's missing $42,000, and the transfer made after his claimed sobriety date. Ryan said the documents were fake. Dad ordered me to remove them before Grandma became confused. Grandma spoke from the end of the table and said, "I'm confused about why everyone thinks I'm too old to recognize my own bank account." The room went silent. Mr. Chen entered a moment later with Aunt Linda. He confirmed that the statements were authentic and that the facility had denied issuing the invoices. He did not accuse Ryan of a crime. He explained only what the records established. Ryan's expression changed. He accused Dad of approving everything and said the consulting company had provided legitimate services. Dad asked him to name one service provided to Grandma. Ryan could not. Mom tried to end the conversation, but Grandma refused. She asked Ryan why he had taken money meant to keep her housed. Ryan said he had planned to repay it after a business deal closed. Grandma answered, "You planned with money that kept me safe." Ryan then blamed gambling addiction. I reminded him that he had just announced 1 year of sobriety, even though the last transfer was much more recent. Ryan shouted that recovery included slips, and I had no right to expose confidential details. I told Ryan the confidentiality ended when he used recovery as a shield while publicly forgiving me for reacting to his theft. Ryan left the house. Mom followed him. Dad stayed at the table, staring at the statements. The exposure did not solve everything that night. It did something more important. It ended the family's ability to describe the situation as my private grudge. Grandma removed Dad's financial authority and named Aunt Linda, with Mr. Chen's firm providing oversight. The bank recovered a portion of the most recent transfers. Ryan's company had little money remaining, so most of the loss is still unresolved. Investigators are reviewing the altered invoices and account access. I do not know whether Ryan will be charged or what the outcome will be. I have provided the records from my own theft because they establish a pattern, even though I withdrew the original complaint. Dad apologized to Grandma and me. He admitted that protecting Ryan had made it easier for him to keep stealing. Mom still says public exposure was cruel and that addiction should be handled privately. I asked Mom why the consequences had to be private when Ryan's recovery performance was public. She had no answer beyond saying he was her son. Ryan has sent several messages accusing me of destroying his life. I have not responded. I am also pursuing the unpaid balance from my savings through an attorney rather than accepting family promises. Grandma remains in the same assisted living facility. Aunt Linda and I visit weekly. Her memory varies, but she remembers Thanksgiving clearly enough to judge that Mr. Chen made the most dramatic entrance of his career. I sometimes regret allowing my parents to talk me out of reporting Ryan the first time. If I had refused, Grandma might never have been targeted. My therapist reminds me that Ryan made those choices, not me. Still, guilt is easier to understand than the anger I feel toward the parents who taught both of us that his future mattered more than my safety. The more investigators examined Ryan's company, the worse the story became. It had been created 11 days before Dad approved the first transfer. It had no employees, clients, or real office. Ryan told Dad it would help assisted living facilities reduce supply costs and promised a 15% return. Dad never saw a contract because Ryan said the opportunity would disappear if Aunt Linda reviewed it. Money from the company account went to cash withdrawals, hotels, gambling-related payment services, and the loan on Ryan's motorcycle. The healthy hobby my parents praised had been purchased partly with Grandma's care money. Ryan had always made his requests carefully. He rarely asked one person for enough to reveal the full problem. He borrowed $400 from Mom, $600 from Dad, and $200 from me. Each relative believed they were solving a separate emergency. At Christmas, he gave expensive gifts purchased with debt, and Mom used his generosity as proof that his finances had improved. After he emptied my savings, the loss was more than $18,600. I had been scheduled to send earnest money for a condo that afternoon. I had measured the bedroom and imagined turning the balcony into a garden. When the transfer failed, I lied to my real estate agent about a banking error. The next day, I withdrew the offer and lost the inspection fee. Ryan did not only take a number from an account, he took the first home I had ever chosen for myself. During family visitation at his treatment program, a counselor asked each relative how Ryan's gambling had affected them. I said I had lost my savings and housing opportunity. Mom interrupted to clarify that Ryan had borrowed the money and the family was repaying it. The counselor asked Ryan what he called taking money without permission. Ryan admitted it was theft. Mom cried afterward and said the counselor had forced him to use criminal language that could damage his recovery. That was when I understood my parents did not merely forgive Ryan. They edited reality until he never had to face the correct word. Ryan later became active in an online recovery group. He posted about accountability while making no payments to me. When I asked why, he said recovery required stability before restitution. 2 months later, he bought the motorcycle. Dad accused me of monitoring Ryan's life for reasons to remain angry. Before Thanksgiving dinner, Mom pulled me into the laundry room and warned me not to provoke him. I asked whether she knew Grandma's transfers were unauthorized. Mom said families should not use words like authorized when helping one another. She promised she and Dad would never let Grandma become homeless, as though their future sacrifice gave Ryan permission to steal in the present. After Ryan left the dinner, Dad admitted Ryan had asked him to lie if Linda discovered the transfers. Ryan had promised repayment after a large bet settled. That admission destroyed the consulting investment story. Dad began crying and said he had spent his life trying to keep Ryan from becoming a criminal. Grandma told Dad that hiding crimes did not prevent them. It only changed who paid. One aunt apologized before leaving. Mom had told relatives I refused to forgive Ryan even after being fully repaid. I showed her the balance. Less than 60% had been returned. In the months since, Dad has joined a support group for relatives of people with gambling addictions. He emailed me that repaying victims protected the gambling more than it protected Ryan. He also admitted that his original $5,000 check was intended to purchase my silence, even if he had called it help. Mom stopped speaking to me after my attorney sent Ryan a demand letter. She says legal action proves I care more about money than family. That accusation no longer works. Money represented years of my labor, Grandma's housing, and the boundaries Ryan believed he could cross. The bank recovered part of Grandma's most recent transfer, and Dad voluntarily repaid the first $12,000 he approved. The rest may never return. Grandma's facility worked with Aunt Linda on a payment plan, so she did not have to move. Ryan's case is still pending. He entered another treatment program after investigators questioned him, but this time, nobody is asking me to treat enrollment as proof of change. Recovery may explain what drove him. It does not erase forged invoices, repeated transfers, or the decision to stand at Thanksgiving and publicly forgive me. I signed a lease on a small condo last month using a lower down payment program. It is not the home I originally lost. On moving day, Grandma gave me a plant that had sat in her kitchen for 20 years. It was the only family gift I wanted. I still wish I had reported Ryan the first time. A formal consequence might have prevented Grandma from becoming his next victim. My therapist reminds me that Ryan made that choice. My parents pressured me, but I also chose silence because I wanted their approval. Acknowledging that mistake is part of making sure I never repeat it. Public exposure was not satisfying in the way revenge stories make it sound. Grandma was humiliated. Dad was devastated. Several relatives cried. But secrecy had become the environment in which Ryan operated. Every private promise created another private victim. At Thanksgiving, the truth finally existed in one room, where nobody could carry home a different version. For once, protecting the holiday did not matter more than protecting the people whose money had been taken. There is one part of Thanksgiving I remember more clearly than Ryan shouting. After the statements were explained, Grandma reached across the table and asked whether I had ever recovered my savings. When I told her no, she looked at my parents and asked why they had allowed her to believe everything was resolved. Mom said they were protecting Grandma from stress. Grandma answered that protection without truth was control. She said her memory problems did not make her money communal property or her opinions optional. That moment changed the family more than my confrontation did. Ryan had relied on everyone believing Grandma was too vulnerable to hear the facts. Instead, she was the person who named the pattern most clearly. I have not forgiven Ryan, but I no longer organize my days around hating him. If he completes treatment, accepts legal responsibility, and makes restitution, that will improve his life. It will not obligate me to restore our relationship. My parents taught me that forgiveness meant removing consequences. I now believe forgiveness, if it ever comes, can exist beside permanent boundaries. The condo plant from Grandma sits beside my balcony door. Every new leaf reminds me that recovery is not a speech, a chip, or an announcement at dinner. It is slow evidence repeated over time. Ryan may eventually produce that evidence. Until then, I will believe the bank records rather than the version of himself he once applauded. I also keep a copy of the Thanksgiving statements in a locked file. For years, documentation felt cold compared with family promises. Now I understand that records do not change depending on who is crying, who feels ashamed, or who wants the holiday to remain pleasant. They gave Grandma and me something our family had repeatedly denied us, a version of events nobody else could edit. So, was I wrong to expose my brother in front of the entire family at Thanksgiving after he stole from me and then from our grandmother? Or was public truth the only thing strong enough to end a family system built on private forgiveness?